Story 1. The full version of the 1812 overture by Pyotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky, including the canons. Story 2. The wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. My father knew some of the crew, and he and I would shed a tear whenever we heard this. It is still haunting to me now. Story 3. Hallelujah by Leonard Cohen or K.D. Lang version. Story 4. She Used to Be Mine from Waitress the Musical by Sarah Bareilles. Story 5. Vincent by Don McLean. My dad's a big softie made of marshmallow, and he introduced me to this song as a young kid. I remember watching him sing with tears in his eyes. Every time I hear it, my breath catches in my throat as I am moved by the song. We danced to it at my wedding, and even though most people didn't know the song, they had tears in their eyes. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I Choose Violence by Jax makes me choke when singing it every time with anger and disappointment. Her song Dance with My Father affects me the same way Vincent does. Story 6. Any Solo by David Gilmour of Pink Floyd. Seriously, any. Story 7. Fix You by Coldplay. Every time those drums hit, it feels like someone reached into my chest and lit a match. Story 8. Southern Cross by Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Never been on a sailboat, but this song takes me there every time I hear it. Story 9. For me, it has to be Child in Time by Deep Purple. The way it builds from that quiet, haunting organ intro into one of the most primal and powerful screams in rock history is pure catharsis. What Ian Gillan does with his voice in that track is simply inhuman. It is a 10-minute journey every single time. Story 10. I Will Always Love You, sung by either Dolly Parton or Whitney Houston, has different styles, but both brought all the feelings to the song. Story 11. Waiting for the End by Linkin Park. I feel like it was one of Chester's last cries for help. The hardest part of ending is starting again. Great song too. Story 12. Me, Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. Everyone. But that's an album. Me, Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon. Story 13. Bring Him Home from Les Miserables, especially performed by Colm Wilkinson. Story 14. Sound of Silence by Disturbed. I do not know why, but this song affects me deeply. Story 15. Supermassive Black Hole by Muse. Twilight Feel is something else. Story 16. Rainbow Connection, Kermit the Frog. It is a masterpiece. Story 17. Howl by Florence and the Machine. It was the first song that got me into independent music, and they were my first concert. I still get chills thinking about it and remembering seeing them in concert. Story 18. Johnny Cash Hurt. The Cranberries, Ode to My Family. Story 19. Comfortably Numb by Pink Floyd. The Child Is Grown, The Dream Is Gone. Story 20. Anhedonia by Chelsea Wolfe and Emma Ruth Rundle. A few years later, I still cannot listen to it without breaking down. It is such a visceral description of the depths of depression. Story 21. Creeping Death by Metallica, especially live. When the crowd starts chanting Die at James's urging, my forearms break out in visible goosebumps. Powerful stuff. Even the studio recording without chanting fans makes it happen to a lesser degree. It has been that way since I first heard it, and it still feels wonderful. Story 22. The live version of Learning to Fly by Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers. Story 23. Amazing Grace. I have heard it at more funerals than I could ever count. Story 24. Two that come to mind are Nights in White Satin and The End by The Doors. Story 25. Iris by Goo Goo Dolls. It feels different when you are in your feelings at 2 a.m. Story 26. I Appear Missing by Queens of the Stone Age. It is just perfect. Story 27. The Night We Met by Lord Huron. Best part. I had all and then most of you, some and now none of you. Story 28. There is some magic in that song. Mark my words. Story 29. California Dreamin' reminds me of a time in my life when nothing bad was happening. My whole immediate family was alive. I was only 6, but it symbolized a moment in time. When I hear it, I think of my childhood home, fun Christmases, and exciting times. Story 30. I have a long list of just such songs. Here are some of them. Chicago. If You Leave Me Now, Elton John. Daniel and Goodbye Yellow Brick Road, Carpenters. Close to You and We've Only Just Begun, Elvis Presley. You've Lost That Loving Feeling, Simon and Garfunkel, The Boxer. Bread. If, Guitar Man, Baby I'ma Want You, Make It With You, Dusty Springfield. The Look of Love, The Windmills of Your Mind, Son of a Preacher Man. Story 31, Deacon Blues by Steely Dan. If You Were Here Tonight by Alexander O'Neill. Story 32, Brendan Number 1 by Fugazi. It does not have any lyrics. Story 33, Exit Music for a Film by Radiohead and Bachelorette by Björk Spring to Mind. Story 34, The High Note in Oh Holy Night by almost anyone, male or female, but Jackie Evancho's is one of the best. Story 35, I was at a Charlie Daniels concert with a group of intoxicated, rowdy motorcycle riders and rural working-class people. He started singing How Great Thou Art, and the entire audience fell silent. Every now and then, I watch it online and it still gives me goosebumps. Story 36, The Opening of Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. The whole song is good, but that guitar intro is like lightning in a jar. Story 37, Heart's cover of Stairway to Heaven Live at the Kennedy Center. Story 38, Never Gonna Give You Up, Rick Astley. Catchy and it gives me the shivers. Never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down. Never gonna run around and desert you. Never gonna make you cry, never gonna say goodbye. Never gonna tell a lie and hurt you. What a great song. If this song doesn't give you goosebumps, then it should at least make you quiver. For anyone who doesn't know this song, please listen to it right now. Story 39, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel with full orchestra. Story 40, Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton. I cannot hear that song without crying. Story 41, Rhapsody in Blue. The way it all comes together near the end gives me full-body goosebumps. Story 42, Eric Clapton, Tears in Heaven. This song is about his son who tragically passed away after falling out of a window. Story 43, Wish You Were Here by Mark Wills makes me cry every time I hear it. Story 44, Cara Mi Adido, and The Girl Crosses That Far-Off Sky. I have found that a few traits can sometimes guarantee that kind of response, such as context and key. Songs that underscore an emotional moment in a film or video game are more likely to trigger that response. For example, Sacrifice, from the Dragon Pilot original soundtrack. If I had listened to that soundtrack on its own without any context or knowledge of where it is from, it probably would not invoke much of a response. However, that track plays during a very emotional moment in the show, and since I have watched the show and know the context, that song very much triggers that response in me almost every time I hear it. Key also matters. B-flat major and E major, for whatever reason, are much more likely to trigger that response than any other key. Otherwise, the rule typically seems to be that the further the key is from C major, the more emotional it feels to me, though every key can trigger it. For example, Sacrifice is in D major. Story 45. Sometimes I get lost for hours listening to Crywank's Song for a Guilty Sadist. The lyrics are sad and sensual, and his voice sounds really good, especially when he sings the word pleasure. It is hauntingly beautiful in many ways. Sad enough to almost cry and passionate enough to be arousing. They chose a very fitting name for their band. Story 46. The Hallelujah Chorus. I have heard that the reason people stand for it is because the king stood the first time it was played, but I believe the reason we still stand through it is because it is uncomfortable to sit while we have shivers running up and down our spines. Story 47. The live version of My Immortal by Evanescence. Partly because I associate the song with a live dance performance I saw once, partly because it is just a hauntingly beautiful song. Story 48. You Want It Darker by Leonard Cohen is a song about making peace with God and accepting death, written and performed by a man who knew he was about to die. Story 49. Cats in the Cradle by Harry Chapin. This song describes my relationship with my father. Story 50. Young Turks, Patty gave birth to a 10-pound baby boy. I had a strained relationship with my parents, and I worked to correct that when my wife and I decided to have children. I did not want to exclude my parents from their grandchildren's lives. The thought of that letter with that ending tears into me every time I hear it. Story 51, Moody Blues Nights in White Satin. I actually just got chills from typing it. Weird. Story 52, O Magnum Mysterium Morton Lauritsen. Story 53, The Spirit Carries On by Dream Theater. Shout out to the incredible live performance with Teresa Thomason. Check it out if you have not. Story 54, Love, Maybe the People, Amazing Frisson from the horn section, the Latin rhythm, interesting rhyme scheme. Story 55, Remember My Name by Sam Fender. He wrote it about his grandparents, particularly his grandmother's dementia. It is beautiful and sad. Story 56, Carol of the Bells performed by Celtic Woman. One of the singers hits a high note, and it sounds like crystal. Story 57, Judy Collins and her a cappella rendition of Amazing Grace. Not for the religious aspect, but her voice is so pure. And when the choir joins in, chills. Story 58, Smells Like Teen Spirit by Tommy Prophet and Flurry version. Story 59, Get You the Moon by Kina. I think of my son who passed away a year ago. I sob and play it over and over again. Story 60, The War on Drugs, Thinking of a Place. Kings of Leon, Arizona. Story 61, Disturbed's cover of The Sound of Silence. Also, Two Steps from Hell Victory. Story 62, Afterlife by Arcade Fire. Mainly because I cannot hear it without thinking about the video. Story 63, You Will Never Walk Alone. Not because it is the Liverpool song, although that can be moving in itself. It is originally from the musical Carousel, where a deceased father sings it to his child. Also, I am moved by my national anthem when it is sung and played at events and award ceremonies. Story 64, Praying by Kesha. I have been a fan ever since her early days, and I think that her Glitter and Gold album is massively underrated. However, there has never been a clearer magnum opus for a musical artist in my opinion. She has written a lot about this particular pain from many different perspectives, but this one is truly a triumph. Story 65, Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, Movement 2. By far the most moving piece of music I have ever had the honor of performing, and hearing it never fails to make me misty-eyed. Shout out to Holst the Planet's number 4, Jupiter. Story 66, Devin Townsend's Kingdom, Stormbending, and Jainism are three transcendent, beautiful, epic songs. They make me feel small and in awe of the universe, yet powerful. On the other end of the spectrum, the perfect simplicity of Ludovico Einaudí's music can give me the same chills. Story 67, Aerials by System of a Down. Specifically 2 minutes and 30 seconds into the song. Story 68, Right Hand Man from the Hamilton soundtrack. Hits every single emotion in just over 5 minutes. Story 69, All Mixed Up, from the Cars' eponymous first album. Time, from Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon. Story 70, Shine, Young Crazy Diamond. Time, The Great Gig in the Sky. Story 71, Paradise City by Guns N' Roses. Something about the intro and the chorus reminds me of the optimism of being young and having your whole life ahead of you. Story 72, Pictures of You, by The Cure is a heartfelt tribute to loss and longing in all its forms. I get sentimental just thinking about it, but hearing it is wonderful, and singing it at karaoke is even better. Story 73, This One. Story 74, Reclamation by Lamb of God, Slaughter the Martyr by Machine Head, and Born Anew by Silosis always hit. Story 75, High Run by Run, Make You Feel My Love by Adele, You by Vast. Story 76, Any Song by Ruben and the Dark and the Bullhorn Singers collaboration. One of my favorite folk bands and indigenous singers is A Match Made in Heaven. Story 77, Right Now Judgment Day by Five Finger Death Punch. I'm going through a rough patch and I feel it in my soul. Story 78, Follow Me, Club Mix, by Alias. Club songs give me the biggest goosebumps of any genre. Story 79, Spiral by Pinegrove. It reminds me of very intimate and vulnerable moments between my wife and me. Goosebumps and slight tears in my eyes every time. Story 80. Submission from Bollywood. Story 81. The turnaround just after the peak of Horizon by Pigeons playing ping pong activates my frisson almost every time. The part right before the Celebrate the People You Love section. I would believe it if Jeremy wrote that riff to activate frisson in the audience. Even just thinking about it can set it off. Pretty wild. Story 82. As a huge fan of electronic dance music, my pick would probably be Ecstasy of Soul by Zed's Dead and Grizz. The intro alone builds so much energy into a massive bass drop. 10 out of 10 would recommend if you like bass music. Story 83. Aurora and Collier collaboration hits every time, especially the last bit. Story 84. Would You Fall in Love with Me Again from Epic the Musical. Story 85. Gethsemane from the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, especially the one sung by Ben Forster. Story 86. The initial orchestral swell in the hologram / The Princess Appears, also known as Binary Sunset. Story 87. In the Night Basha Bullet. Story 88. Cornfield Chase or any track from the Interstellar original soundtrack. Story 89. How to Save a Life by Coldplay, especially since I listened to it a lot during my depressive days. Story 90. Anyone by Demi Lovato, especially when she sang it live at the Grammys. Absolute chills every time, and I cry. Story 91. This 1928 version of Mississippi John Hurt Stack O'Lee Blues. Story 92. John Prine, Summer's End. Or most anything by John Prine, come to think of it. Story 93. Rosetta Stoned. But I forgot my pen. I messed up again. Typical. Story 94. My Way by Elvis Presley. Love by Nat King Cole. Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers. Story 95. Mama by from Harlem. The beat drops after the part where it goes. I reach down in between my legs and ease the seat back. Story 96. I am not going to lie. It is when Tony Orlando saw there were 100 yellow ribbons. Story 97. Go by Public Service Broadcasting. The band overlays old sound fragments, in this case audio recordings from the Apollo 11 moon landing. I still get goosebumps every time the Eagle has landed. Story 98. Time in a Bottle by Jim Croce is a beautiful look at love and life. The older I get and the more years I have been married, the more the words mean to me. Story 99. You Are My Starship by Norman Connors and Sailing by Christopher Cross. Story 100. The last 30 seconds of Vladimir Horowitz playing Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 3 at Carnegie Hall. When he hits the final chord and the audience erupts into enthusiastic applause. It gives me goosebumps every time. I have probably listened to it 500 times. Story 101. Doombed Bring Me the Horizon Love at the Royal Albert Hall. Story 102. The first 5 notes of Radiohead's Everything in Its Right Place. Story 103. Salico is an old Georgian folk song about a man visiting his deceased wife's grave. It is haunting. Story 104. Someday, when my life has passed me by, I lie around and wonder why. You were always there for me. Love me some Sugar Ray. Story 105. Angel of Death, the song that started me on my metal journey in 5th grade. Story 106. Senses by Miko. I have listened to it 63 times this week and it is just so beautiful. Story 107. There's a verse in a Weezer song called My Heart Songs from the Red album where Rivers sings about the first time he heard Nevermind and how it inspired him. It still gives me goosebumps because I grew up during that exact time and felt some of those same feelings. Story 108. If it is the right mood and setting, any song I have heard a bunch of times sometimes fits. On the way home just a little while ago, I jammed out to Tool Vicarious. An absolute banger that gets me motivated. This song fits. Story 109. This Is Me by Keala Settle. I first watched The Greatest Showman years after its release with my daughter and sobbed. Story 110. Incinerate by Sonic Youth. The guitar riff and the melancholy lyrics take me to a different place. Story 111. Oh Holy Night by David Crowder Band. Any version will do though. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.